Welcome to Caldwell County Today. I'm Paige Counts, Public Information Officer for Caldwell County. Joining me today are Cindy Akins and Jackie Clarkson from Hospice. Welcome, ladies.
Thank you.
I should say from AMOREM.
That's correct.
I'm still getting used to that, so be patient with me. And y'all are here to talk about volunteering. Jackie is a volunteer and Cindy's volunteer coordinator. So Cindy, tell us about being a volunteer. I mean, just overview. What do your volunteers do?
Well, first I'll say that AMOREM began with volunteers.
Mm-hmm.
So we still have actually the very first volunteer that started with us. She is still a volunteer with us now, 40 years later. She is one of our hairstylist volunteers. So we began with volunteers. We need volunteers. Medicare requires us to have volunteers. So 5% of the patient time that we spend with our patients must be provided by volunteers. So we desperately need volunteers. The companionship that they provide, among other things, is vital. So we're tickled to have almost 300 volunteers that we have right now. And that includes our volunteers. But there are many, many, many ways our volunteers can serve. And I always like to talk about that in interviews because a lot of times I think people first have the impression, as they probably would, that they serve patients at the bedside. And that is very much true and a need that we have. But we also have needs for volunteers to serve in our offices, to serve in the long-term care facilities. As I mentioned, we have our volunteers. We have volunteer ambassadors that serve as advocates in between AMOREM and their congregation. They serve as advocates to educate their congregation about AMOREM and our services. We have volunteer chaplains. We have volunteers that serve on our grounds, that deliver meals, so among other things. So you can see we have many, many ways that volunteers can actually serve. But our greatest need is to serve patients and their families.
And when you talk about being a hospice volunteer, what's required?
So the requirements to be a volunteer are, first I always like to say to have a passion, a passion to serve others. But logistically wise, we do require volunteers, of course, to go through training. And before training, we actually have necessary paperwork, background checks, things like that. Once they become a volunteer and go through the training, of course, we have our interviews before and after training to be sure that that's what volunteers really want to do. You know, sometimes volunteers may go through a training and then decide that's not for me. But we really get to know our volunteers first. But once they go through training, then we have some requirements. They have to keep up continuing education, which is a very small amount. They do have to serve 4 hours per year. And we, of course, keep up to date with their driver's license and insurance and things like that. So there are a few requirements, but again, I think the main one is that they truly just have a passion to serve others, and that will show when they begin to serve in whatever role that is. So,
speaking of passion to serve others, Jackie, you are one of the volunteers.
Yes.
Why did you decide to become a hospice volunteer?
A lady at church was an ambassador, and she and I were friends, and she talked about it a lot. And I thought, this is something I can do. This is something I can do. And I went to the training and just fell in love with the idea. So I've been doing it for almost 9 years.
And during those 9 years, what kind of roles have you taken on as a volunteer?
Okay. Right now, I'm sitting at the reception desk. We screen the visitors when they come in and show them where the rooms are, guide them down to the rooms. But I have been visiting in the homes with patients. I've had a lot of interesting patients that I've worked with. I've done 11th hour, and I'm signed up to be one of the veterans honoring our veteran patients. So I look forward to doing that in the future.
And you said you had a lot of interesting stories. Can you tell me, kind of generically, protecting HIPAA, all those things, about some of your involvement directly with the patients, how it's touched you, how it's touched them?
Okay. I had one patient who was legally blind but loved to read. So every time I would go, the family, with the patient's help, had picked out something for me to read. And I would just sit and read to them. And sometimes it'd be the newspaper or their Sunday devotional. And sometimes we read a cowboy western. I read a couple of chapters every time. And then we would talk about what we were reading. And his life experiences often came into the conversation, so that was interesting. And I had another patient who was a veteran and loved to talk about that. His family said they were tired of hearing his stories. And since I am a veteran, we could kind of connect because we were both Air Force. So I knew what he was talking about. And that just tickled him to death because then he even had more stories to tell. So it was very interesting.
Cindy, right now, you don't have volunteers going into the homes. But when you get back to that, what kind of volunteer are you looking for?
Mainly to provide just companionship, just like as Jackie was saying, to be at the bedside or be in the home of the patient, or if the patient resides in a facility, a long-term care facility, or even in the hospital. Sometimes, our patients are in the hospitals, or on our patient care unit. We really need volunteers to serve on the unit, and that's really important, not only to provide company for the patient and the family, support for the family, but to help our staff, because our staff are so busy during the day, and to have volunteers there to assist them with things like that, that's really helpful. But a lot of times our volunteers, as Jackie was saying, patients just want them to be there. We have a veteran volunteer, as a matter of fact. When he visits his patient, they watch TV together, they watch westerns together. Or maybe sometimes our volunteers provide respite. Our caregivers are just so worn down and they just need a break to go out and go for a walk, or to go to a doctor's appointment, or to get their hair cut. So we arrange volunteers to do that, to be at the home. Sometimes our patients are sleeping, and our volunteers are there just to be in the room, to be sure that things are okay. And but it really is a special bond. I think that what our volunteers, what they provide for our patients and families, it's just really indescribable, the service that they provide. And I think a lot of times our volunteers say that they gain probably much more out of it than the patients. But again, just probably providing companionship for our patients wherever they reside.
The families, I often hear from the families, they're just overwhelmed with thanks for coming, especially if you've gone for respite where the lady can just go get her hair fixed. They come back and they're just so grateful that you were there. It really warms your heart. Gives you goosebumps and warms your heart.
And we do like for our volunteers to be there once a month. If they are assigned to a patient, then they visit or call. We do have some volunteers that are still calling their patients right now because they can't visit them. They were assigned a patient before COVID, so they're still making phone calls or sending cards. But that companionship is so important.
How do you match patients and volunteers?
We look at, first of all, our social workers assess to see if there in fact is a need or a request that the patient and or family request a volunteer. And we see what exactly that need is, whether it be for solely companionship or caregiver relief, or even providing transportation. That doesn't happen a lot, but sometimes our volunteers are willing to provide transportation to get their patient out of the house and take them to Burke King. But we really look at the vicinity of the volunteer, where they reside, what county, and where within that county, and then where the patient is, or the facility, if it's a patient in a facility. Because we don't want to ask volunteers to drive, from county to county, unless they're willing and they want to do that. But we look at the location, and then we look at the need. We also really try to get to know our volunteers, because volunteer services, myself and a couple other coworkers, we don't really get to know the patients or the families as much. So we rely on the social workers because they do know the patients. So we really collaborate with our social workers a lot. We talk with them on the phone about the need. Our social workers are really our key players. And they stay in touch with our volunteers monthly, and they give our volunteers updates on patients and what's going on. Maybe they've changed locations, or maybe they're approaching death. So we really rely on the social workers. So they give us a lot of information initially about the patient. So when we see a patient come through and we think, oh, Jackie would be great, we're just going to pick up the phone and call Jackie. And most of the time, our awesome volunteers say, just give me the information I need and I'll be there. But like I said earlier, we ask them to visit at least once a month. Every week would be wonderful. And we sometimes do have volunteers who have the time to do that. Some of our volunteers really, really grow close to our patients and their families. Sometimes they provide support more to the family, I think, than the patient, depending on the situation. But sometimes our volunteers are able to visit more than just once or twice a month, which is wonderful. But our volunteers do keep track of their visits or their phone calls or the cards that they mail. We have the logistics part of volunteering, which always isn't the fun part, but it's the part we have to keep track of, and that's turning in progress notes that they've made a visit on a certain day and they visited for so long, how the visit was, and then we give that information to our team members. So we're all on the same team. Our chaplains, our CNAs, our nurses, our social workers, our volunteers, our bereavement staff. So we all try to keep each other in touch with what's going on, because we're all caring for this one patient. So volunteers are greatly needed, for sure.
Jackie, I'm going to ask you the question, is it sad being a hospice volunteer?
No, I don't think so, because you understand that what you're doing is a valuable service. It's solemn. It can be fun, but it's solemn. But I always try to think that I have to be strong, because the families need to see that. And I have to support, the families. So you kind of get that mindset and because you don't know the patients, especially if you're doing 11th hour, you haven't been around them an awful lot, and you're talking more to the families. So it can be sad, but it's also very uplifting to have been there at that time.
And you have mentioned the Veterans Service, and you have some things here to show us. Tell us, what is the Veterans Ceremony and how that's conducted?
Hold that up.
Okay.
So when our patients are assessed, initially actually, to be in the care of our services, we learn that they are a veteran. And part of what we do in volunteer services and across the whole entire organization and team is to provide resources for our veteran patients and their families. So we belong to a program called We Honor Veterans, and we work closely or collaborate with the National Hospice and Palliative Care Organization and the Department of Veterans Affairs. So again, we are constantly learning about resources for our veterans and sharing that with them. But as a way to honor our veteran patients, when they are assessed for services, we also assess to see if they would like a presentation. And it's called a Veteran Honoring Veteran presentation. And what's wonderful about it is our wonderful veteran volunteers get to present to our patients a beautiful lapkin, a handmade lapkin. And this is special to our organization. We have volunteers that make these lapkins for us. We actually have a pattern, so if anybody crochets and knits and would like to make lapkins for us, we are constantly in need of lapkins all year long. This is something we continue to do all year. But the lapkin is presented to the patient as well as a framed certificate, and it has their name on it and their branch of service. And then we also present the handheld flag And these are really special because the little stand here that this flag is on, they are made by the American Legion Post 29 in Lenoir. So our veterans make these for us and donate them. And then of course we have the lapel pin that we present to the patient. It's beautiful, beautiful service when our veteran volunteers present to our patients. The bond that you have with other veterans is just, can't even put it into words how special it is. So it will bring tears to your eyes to watch the presentation wherever that patient resides, facilities, on our unit, in the home. The presentations can be anywhere from 1 minute to 10 minutes, depending on the patient and how they're doing, and the request of the family. But it's just a way of us honoring the patient. Some of our veterans have not been told thank you for their service. Some veterans don't have family still. So we become their family, and this is just our way to say thank you and to honor them. And like I said, it's very meaningful, extremely meaningful. And we have close to 30 veteran volunteers across our 12 counties right now that we serve, and we're always needing more veteran volunteers. But of course, during COVID, our volunteers have not been able to present. However, our social workers and chaplains have. So this is something that we have not stopped even during COVID. But it's a beautiful, beautiful way for us to celebrate our veterans.
And Jackie, you do this, and thank you for your service in the Air Force. I would be remiss if I didn't say that. So, training. I know you've got something coming up.
We do. We have a virtual training. We have a virtual volunteer training. We have, since COVID, had 3 volunteer virtual trainings, and it will be April the 26th and the 28th. And the times will be up on your screen there. We've got a flyer that we're going to show. But if somebody is interested in coming through training, they just give us a call. They can email us, they can text us, however they'd like to reach out to us to let us know they're interested. We do have many that are signed up already. We hope that moving forward after this training that we'll be able to do in-person trainings. And those are usually at our Hudson facility on our Hudson campus. However, we will be providing in-person trainings at our Valdez campus. So that's going to be exciting. We have a volunteer coordinator over there because we're growing. So we are really excited about the training. And again, if anybody's interested, they just give us a call and we'll talk to them.
Jackie, what would you tell somebody considering being a volunteer about the training portion?
I found it fascinating because they have a lot of different speakers, so it's not just one person standing there boring you to death. They have some volunteers who come and talk about their experiences, and different people on the staff come. A nurse comes, so it's very realistic as to what you can expect. They don't, soft pedal it. You get the truth of what you're going to be expected to do. And I went through the in-person training, and it was 2 long Saturdays, but it was fun. It wasn't boring.
And the other question I have for you, Jackie, if someone's considering being a volunteer, what do you tell them?
Just look into your heart, because Cindy's word was passion. You have to examine your heart and see if this is something that you think you can do. And I think most people have it in their heart to do something. And there's such a wide area of skills that they need that, you may have a strength that may not be sitting with the patients, but you may have a strength that they can use.
Cindy, what else do we need to say about volunteer training, volunteers? I know we could talk all day.
We could talk all day, I know. Well, I just wanted to piggyback on what you said. Ultimately, all of our volunteers touch our patients. Even the volunteers that come into my office or Crystal's office, and they prepare packets, admission packets, or they write note cards, or they prepare our volunteer newsletter to get ready to mail. Ultimately, those hours will benefit our patients and our families and our staff, our entire AMOREM family. So I just really want to stress again that you don't have to want to serve a patient at the bedside, there's just so many other opportunities. We've had some volunteers that have come through training. You could just see the nervousness on their face, and they even express, I'm not really sure I want to do this. But as Jackie said, by the time they get through training and they hear all the presenters, they feel much more at ease. Maybe they go through training and they say, okay, I just want to start in this area. I'd just like to come to your office and help you with mailings. And then over time, some of them have changed their mind and they say, well, you know what, I think I would like to sit at the desk. I can talk to people when they come through the door. I can pick up the phone or whatever it is. And it's really neat to see how that changes within and the more comfortable they are. And we want to be so welcoming to our volunteers, and because Jackie is so busy. She has so much going on in her world that I even learned about today when she was talking to me before the interview. Our volunteers are busy, extremely busy in all ways. So we don't want to take so much of their time that they can't do the things they enjoy or they're already committed to. So we work with their schedule. And if they can't volunteer, they say, no, I'm sorry, I can't do that today, or I can't take care of that this time, and that's fine. That's the beauty of volunteering. We make it convenient for them, or we try to.
You do.
Good.
You do.
Okay, good. So I would just encourage anybody that's the least bit interested, call us, talk to us. Maybe we can make you feel a little bit more comfortable about it. I think that if you have the interest at all, though, if that interest strikes you the least bit, that's enough for you to give us a call and just to ask us about the details, because it's a beautiful experience, and it's one, just like for our volunteers we were talking about earlier, these amazing young adults who get to come through our training, just like adult volunteers, and who get to serve patients and families. It's a beautiful experience to watch them mature and see end-of-life issues and experience those real-life things that they may not have an opportunity to do at some point in their life. So I would just encourage anybody to call us.
And how do people sign up again for volunteer training? Okay,
they can call us. Our number is 828-754-0101, and they can ask to speak to someone in volunteer services. It will be myself or Crystal or Megan. There's 3 of us now. So they can just ask to speak to someone in volunteer services, and we will mail them the packet of information. We'll mail them the dates, the actual application, a background check, a couple other pieces of information that we need from our volunteers to get started. And then comes training, the end of April. It'll be here before we know it.
It will be. Thank you both for joining me today. And Jackie, thank you for volunteering.
Oh, you are quite welcome. I get more out of it than anybody.
And thank you for watching Caldwell County Today.